To order, we are meeting in public. Welcome to continuation of meeting number 119 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format. I would like to remind all participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Whether participating in person or by Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. We are discussing the amendments of Mr. Chang to the motion of Mr. Bruno Desepp at the time of the suspension on Monday, December the 2nd, and on Thursday, December the 5th. MP Kwan had the floor. The following were on the list to debate the amendments after MP Kwan. MP Yurovitz, which Ms. Kayabaga will take over, and MP Kmich. So with that, MP Kwan, you have the floor. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Before I go into comments, I'm wondering, though, whether or not the committee could get a quick update with respect to the request for the RCMP and CBSA to appear before the committee. You had informed us, Mr. Chair, in the last meeting that they had declined the invitation and that the committee's wish was to go back to indicate that we would like to extend the invitation again, and that if they were to decline it, we would then take further action, either to compel them to come to committee or to even subpoena them. In addition, I'm wondering if you have any updates for us with respect to the ministers who declined to come to the committee on this very important question. So can we just get a quick update before I get into it?
Excellent question. I wanted to, because you had the floor, I wanted to tell the honorable members that RCMP, CBSA, Public Safety, Passport Program, and IRCC, they have all agreed to come to the committee. And on the ministers will not be able to appear in December. So basically, they will not be able to come before the adjournment of the parliament. So it will be afterwards. That answers MP Kwan's question. So MP Kwan, floor yours.
Sorry, if I could just further ask a question as a follow-up on that. Did CBSA, RCMP indicate what date they would be available?
That is not the question. They have said that they are willing to come forward. So I'm sure, once we done with the committee business, when we are in a position to bring them in, they will be able to. Mr. Clerk, you have anything else to add?
Nope.
No? Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
And for the ministers, you indicated that they would not be able to attend before the end of December. Was there any indication that they would be available in the new year? Did they give you any dates, or did they just...
All we heard is that they would not be able to come to the meeting until after the the adjournment during December. So I'm not sure. I'm sure when we come back in end of January, so we'll send an invite again and see what their response is. And I or clerk, we both will be able to get back to the honourable members.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, I guess we'll wait and see about the minister's availability in the new year. I'm glad to hear that a further invitation will be extended to them. And then maybe there's some ability to coordinate this effort with CBSA, IRCC, and the RCMP, because I think that they all need to be here as the matter is important, and there are lots of questions from committee members. On that note...
I earlier said they will come, MP Kwan, so it's clear, right, to every member that all these officials that I said, I can again say one more time, RCMP, CBSA, Public Safety, Passport Program, and IRCC, they all are willing to come and they will come. Thank you.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Then I'll resume where I left off last time. At the committee. Where we were at, I was just about to go into, Mr. Chair, about the work of Amnesty International, where they undertook an observational fact-finding mission at the Canada-U.S. border in Manitoba. And at that time, with the first administration of the Trump administration, where they brought in the travel ban and all of their anti-immigration, anti-Muslim, anti-migrant workers policies, two researchers were sent to the border crossing to interview refugee claimants who had recently then, at that time, made the dangerous journey in frigid temperatures in order to bypass the Safe Third Country Agreement and be eligible to make an asylum claim in Canada. The reason why people had to do that was because they were being forced to cross at irregular crossings. And crossing at irregular crossings, I know some people, including the Prime Minister at one point, called it illegal when in fact it isn't. I just want to make that clear as well, Mr. Chair. And so people were trying to seek safety. And so as a result of the Safe Third Country Agreement, they were
Sorry, point of order, Mr. Chair. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but is crossing at with the Safe Third Country Agreement back in place, is crossing at non-controlled borders, is that now considered legal?
It's a debate, Mr. McLean. I will go to MP Kwan. MP Kwan, floor yours.
No, actually, it's a common mistake that people make, and people sometimes purposely make those errors so as to gaslight asylum seekers who are needing to get to safety. When people cross at irregular
No, point of order, Mr. Chair. There's no gaslighting going on here. This is a routine question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, MP.
Well, as I was saying, there are people who routinely call it illegal when in fact it isn't. And that when they do that on purpose and deliberately, that would be, in my books, gaslighting asylum seekers who are trying to get to safety. And in fact, it's very clear in our regulations, in our laws, in our act, that when people cross irregularly into Canada, it is not an illegal act. Mr. Chair, as I was mentioning about Amnesty International and their fact-finding mission, they held interviews with asylum seekers. And during these interviews, they had observed and found the following. One is that the notion of abandoned dreams of freedom in the United States. Now, when they asylum seekers arrived in the U.S., individuals were interviewed, said that their original feelings of optimism about finding freedom and safety there were replaced with feelings of vulnerability and lack of protection. In fact, this was not just through the direct policy actions undertaken by the first Trump administration, but by the change in public atmosphere ushered in by the rhetoric and climate that the Trump administration had created. Mr. Chair, when we say that, we're seeing it now too, right? The anti-migrant, anti-asylum seekers, anti-immigrant viewpoints is becoming more and more extreme to the point where people feel, I think, very emboldened by their discriminatory views, by their racist views, that they don't even try to hide it anymore. And this is really, in essence, what people were talking about, that when you create that atmosphere, when you have, under the Trump administration, in that first administration, going about in his racist way, targeting migrants and targeting immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees, you can imagine what the public is picking up on. They think, hey, you know, if the president could do that, if the president is saying that, then there's nothing wrong for them to carry on with their racist views publicly and openly. You know, this is what people had to endure, and I'm sad to say, and I fear this, that this is going to be ongoing and even be further escalated in this second Trump administration. And I'm sad, too, from this point of view, that the Canadian government actually played into all of that. In all of the approach that the minister of immigration has taken in changing the levels plan, in blaming migrants, international students, for the housing crisis. We're playing into that kind of narrative, that kind of approach, that kind of racist attitude toward migrants, international students, and immigrants and refugees, and so on. And to me, is wrong. You know, we're just simply then the government. I shouldn't say we, because I'm definitely not in that space. But the prime minister, the minister, the Liberals are actually playing into exactly that kind of rhetoric, and I don't even know if they know how dangerous it would be. It's politically convenient for them to blame migrants for the housing crisis, international students for the crisis, but there's a price to pay. I think there's a price to pay for the community, for people who look like me, and what it means for them, ultimately, with the racism, with the discrimination, with the hate that is going to be hurled towards us. Mr. Chair, the other thing that the Amnesty International found in their fact-finding mission were concerns about arbitrary immigration actions. Individuals interviewed from Somalia explained that while they had made their asylum claim prior to the Trump administration, at that time, their hearings had been without explanation canceled, and in some cases, not rescheduled. That's what people were faced with during that time in the first administration. They weren't able to find any reassurances that, including from their legal counsel, the cases that they could obtain, I'm sorry. Sorry, let me just go back. So, I was mentioning that people were not able to get from their legal counsel in the cases that they were in, that their claims would actually even be heard. They were just arbitrarily canceled without dates, without time, without any information about the status of their application. Now, you can imagine what that means for people. Many, had the feelings that fear, I guess, is one way to describe it, maybe the most appropriate way to describe that uncertainty, not knowing what is your future, what does it even mean that your asylum claim has been canceled and you don't have a date on when it would be heard. And they don't know what further action might be taken. They don't know what their life is going to be like at that moment. And this, of course, created enormous stress, anxiety, and fear in the hearts of minds of those who were waiting for their claim to be heard and for their status to be determined and for that fair procedural process to take its course. The U.S. wanted to claim that they are a safe third country, but can you imagine for an asylum seeker where the application was just arbitrarily canceled and they have no idea when and if their claim would be heard and what it means for them during that time? Mr. Chair, the other thing that Amnesty International found at that time and what they observed with their mission was around immigration detentions. Widespread and unjustified immigration detention were well documented in the United States for decades, actually. And the Trump administration then expanded it with his hateful, discriminatory targeting of migrants, with the travel ban, with the racist immigration policies. And several of the individuals interviewed explained that they were detained upon arrival and throughout the duration of their asylum claim process. That means that they actually were never able to go out of the community. They were in detention the entire time. And as explained by the Harvard report, individuals under this detention are far less likely to have access to legal counsel or consultation, and are also far less likely to be able to make a successful asylum claim as a result. And it was clear that the Amnesty researchers that the individuals, including children, were detained in the United States who simply would not have been in Canada, and that this was in clear violation of the international legal standards and obligations governing the detention of refugees and migrants. That's what happened to people in that first administration. We saw a lot of news coverage on this matter. As I indicated, I had called for an emergency debate in the House, which was granted by the Speaker to raise the alarming situation that was happening south of the border to our closest neighbor when the Trump administration came to office and what it meant. And people, actually, I remember this like it was yesterday. It kind of reminds me of what's going on today, you know. And it was cold. It was the winter here in Canada. And I remember people lined up outside around the block to try to get into the visiting gallery so that they can watch that debate. And I had the opportunity to talk to some of the people there and why they were there. And they all expressed their concerns, their deep concerns for what was going on in the United States. Some of them raised the experiences of racism and discrimination that they had experienced themselves. And many of them, of course, raised the issue of how they wish for Canada to stand up, to be strong, to be on the right side of history during this time. And I talked to many of them during that time, and people braved the cold in order to try to get into the chamber, this visiting gallery, in order to watch that debate during that time, Mr. Chair. Now, of course, this was what's going on, so people did not get legal counsel. People were arbitrarily detained. People's application hearings were canceled without knowing where their future hold or when their hearing would even be heard. And Mr. Chair, Amnesty International also observed that claims, of course, were being rejected. Now, the Harvard report had explained at length about how well-founded asylum claims were often summarily rejected in the United States. And this was in large part due to the obstacles faced by the claimants held in detention in preparing their case. In a troubling example of this, Mr. Chair, an individual interviewed by Amnesty made an asylum claim based on his sexual orientation in the United States. He was held in detention, and his claim was rejected. Luckily, he was able to raise funds to obtain a bond to be released from detention, and then he made the dangerous trip, crossing irregularly into Canada. That individual's claim was heard by the Immigration Refugee Board, the IRB, and it was so clear to them that he immediately received a positive decision on his claim at the completion of the hearing. That's a stark difference, isn't it? The United States rejected their claim. Canada, on the other hand, accepted the claim immediately. Now, normally through an IRB process, the decision could take some time. But for this particular situation, the decision was rendered immediately because the person was found to be at risk if they were to return to their country, that their persecution that they were experiencing is real. The IRB, by the way, is an independent board who undertakes this work and is not subject to political interference. These are individuals who are doing this work and making that assessment entirely on their own with full independence. They are, in many ways, I suppose, is a quasi-judicial kind of process that people undergo. And now, Mr. Chair, with respect to that individual, the fact is this. Had that individual not made the dangerous trip to Canada, he would have been deported, and that his life would have been put in real danger. And with the Safe Third Country Agreement, in effect, Canada would have been complicit in that man's demise. That's a factual case, Mr. Chair, of what had happened that Amnesty had reported. Now, during that time, Amnesty also witnessed this with their fact-finding mission. Increased immigration raids. Many of the individuals interviewed spoke of recently of experiencing a significant increase in immigration raids, and this was most frequently experienced by Somalian asylum seekers. That's what Amnesty International found during that time. They spoke of friends and neighbors being suddenly arrested and detained when reporting for regular immigration appointments, as well as raids occurring at workplaces and apartment complexes and so on. Now, this was, Mr. Chair, considered a key factor for individuals to make the decisions to undertake the dangerous trip to Canada. I should pause here to say, I know that some people think, oh, well, you know, people make these trips because they didn't, they wanted to somehow queue jump and they wanted to somehow take advantage of Canada's system. Let us be clear. People don't embark on a dangerous journey in the dead of winter, trekking through snow just for fun. People don't do that for fun. This is not like, you know, a tobogganing trip or something with the family and friends that you're sort of doing this. This is not like a cross-country ski holiday for people. People were doing that because their lives were in danger. They felt that they have no other choice. They felt that they are, if they were returned back to their country of origin, that they could lose their life, Mr. Chair. And so it is not a walk in the park by any means, and it's not a fun thing for people to embark on. There were many media reports that pointed out the significant raids taking place and what appeared to be a shift away from the targeting only those with criminal records, but to targeting anyone. We're now actually seeing very potentially the repeat of this history with a second Trump administration, maybe perhaps even more aggressively so. I will put on the record at a little later with some of the reporting of what's going on now and what we might anticipate with the second Trump administration. During that time, Amnesty had indicated that many of the reports spoke to the fear that is now gripping the immigrant communities, and perhaps the first Trump administration would move forward with its promised forced deportation. Mr. Chair. Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Sorry, I thought you were.
You have the floor.
You were signaling something
Sorry.
to me. Okay. Yeah, so that's the reality of what people were faced with, and very real for people. For us who are sitting here in safety here in Canada, we may not know any of that. We may not have any of those fears in our hearts and minds. And unless if you're a person who's been persecuted, unless if you're put in that place, we may never understand it. But one thing for sure, though, I can hear them. I can hear their cries. And I see their cries, and I think that we as Canadians, as a country who stands for fairness, who stands for justice, need to ensure that we do our part, Mr. Chair. And I'll have more to say with respect to that, especially now in the face of this second Trump administration. Mr. Chair, Amnesty International also found that there was exploitation and danger at the border. Due to the nature of the asylum claimant's journey, and in order for them to be able to make a claim in Canada because of the Safe Third Country Agreement, asylum claimants are not only vulnerable to the harsh weather conditions, but they're also vulnerable to exploitation from the so-called consultants and agents who charge significant sums of money to get them near the border. We know that there were situations where people were who were faced with such dire situations that they were taken advantage of in those situations. Like literally people would, I guess in their desperation, spend that money in the belief that those who are there whose really goal is to just make some quick cash and to exploit the situation, who don't really care about the safety of these individuals, would undertake that kind of activity. We know that there are concerns around trafficking being brought up as well, Mr. Chair, for people who are in these desperate situations. Mr. Chair, Amnesty International concluded that this fact-finding mission by once again advocating that Canada suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement. That was the end of the fact-finding mission, and that's what they were calling for, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, as we now know, not only did the government not undertake that measure, in fact, they went further to create further barriers and blockades for people to get to safety. And then we saw a number of those measures put in place as well after this. Amnesty not only had called for the Canadian government to suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement, they also suggested that at minimum that the government invoke Article 10 of the agreement, which allows for the agreement to be suspended for 3 months. That would have given us some time to talk with the Canadian counterpart about the situation, to see how we can go about addressing this issue in a thoughtful way. And unfortunately, the Canadian government did not take that advice, did not suspend the agreement, and we had every authority to do so. And Canada could have done it, actually, ourselves. Under that provision of the agreement, under that article of the agreement, to suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement. We didn't actually have to have agreement with the United States. We could have actually done that work unilaterally. Mr. Chair, Amnesty International, of course, at the time was concerned enough with the current state of asylum crossing that they felt obligated to get people to the ground and to try to better understand what was happening on the ground. And that was the incredible work that they had done. And despite what the then Minister of Immigration seems to try and claim that nothing has changed, it is important to know that many people, including experts, disagree with that sentiment. As the immigration critic at the time, I can't tell you about the volume of correspondence that I got from all walks of life, all across the country, and in fact from outside of the country as well. And people who are real experts on this issue, who will know about the Safe Third Country Agreement and its implications, its legality, far more than I would even forget. They are the real experts, and they all expressed the same sentiment to me. They all indicated about how they believe the Safe Third Country Agreement puts people in danger, and in fact, it is a violation of migrant rights and asylum seeker rights. And what's more, it was becoming evident that people in the asylum system know what it feels like on the ground, and to them is clear as day that the climate had changed drastically in the United States, and that was a big part of the motivation for them to take their lives on their own hands, to embark on those dangerous journeys, Mr. Chair. Many of the media reports, such as the ones that I had previously cited, Mr. Chair, detail both the number of hours asylum seekers had to trek through the snow and the frigid temperatures. Often it was around minus 20. I think actually in Ottawa today it's about, what, minus 4 or 5 or something like that. And I'm wearing snow boots. I've got my big parka on, and I've been cold all day. I've been drinking hot water all day, you know, and that was only for me about a 15-minute walk from my apartment to the House of Commons. I can't imagine being in a minus 20 temperature, being out there for hours on end, being stuck in the snow and not, you know, with snow that's waist deep and you're just trying to labor through the field in that kind of condition. I can't imagine. I'm pretty sure that if I was put in that kind of environment, I wouldn't survive it, Mr. Chair. But despite these conditions, and despite many of these people not being well prepared, not having the right coats and boots and so on to deal with the conditions, they went with that. They undertook those journeys, Mr. Chair. So you have to, for all those who think that people just do this, for fun. There's nothing fun about that, Mr. Chair. People do this with great risks. And that means that the situation for these asylum seekers is reached that height of desperation. I can't imagine why else would people undertake such a journey. And now, with the current situation, I don't know what's going to happen for the people that are going to be there. We know that in the news, we're hearing in the news that the Trump administration is working on putting together a massive deportation plan. And what will happen this time round, Mr. Chair, for those people, Mr. Chair? That is a big question. And it is about people's lives at the end of the day. That is what we're talking about. At that time, during the first administration, many individuals and organizations have voiced their concern, and it wasn't just over the winter period that they were concerned about this. Many were concerned about when the weather gets warmer, and then, of course, in the warm weather, as the snow melts, people will worry about potential flooding and how dangerous those fields would be, because it would be very wet, and it's quite possible the flooding season could also create dangerous environments for people as well. Mr. Chair, I suspect that many of the asylum seekers would not be familiar with the weather conditions and what that means when the weather turns like that. And you know, those are the kinds of things that asylum seekers are faced with, and they are in such a desperate environment that they often would embark on these journeys thinking, hoping that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that there is somehow an ability for them to get to safety. We talked about this at the time, about getting ready for the Trump administration, with the impact of the Trump's administration, first administration's discriminatory immigration policy. And I truly believe that at that time, everybody wanted the situation to be handled properly. I should note, actually, in Quebec, many of the residents opened their hearts and minds, and some of them even opened their doors, by the way, for the asylum seekers who were trekking through. I know that the CBSA officials, our CMP officials, were tremendous in treating these asylum seekers in their desperate situation at the time. I heard many stories that had come back on how people were treated with some level of dignity when they managed to actually make the trip, and then are in Canada, and then, of course, later on being able to make their asylum claim and to go through the process. And I think that it is the case that nobody wanted the situation to get from bad to worse. And I really truly believe that at the time, that included everybody at committee from all sides, from all political parties, that people did not want this situation to get worse. And Mr. Chair, and resettlement organizations servicing the communities were also stretched thin, by the way, by the big promise of the government around increased refugee targets, but the inadequate funding of the services. Mr. Chair, I'll share this story with you. I know that at the time, in that first administration, many people used Roxham Road to get to safety, first Manitoba, and then later on it was Roxham Road. But British Columbia at that time, we were the second province to have the largest number of asylum seekers crossing over from the BC border. And there were some asylum seekers who made it here to Canada. And, you know, one organization, and this is just out of the beautiful, just about how beautiful people are. This is a small organization in my riding. I won't name them by name, but it was a small organization in the riding. They weren't hugely funded by the government in any stretch of the imagination. And at that time, they were asylum seekers who came in. And in many of these asylum seekers, when they come in, they weren't getting any resources or support from the government in any way, shape, or form. So they were unhoused. They didn't have any ability to really to survive. And you know what happened? On their own, the people working in that organization invited these peoples to their home to stay, albeit temporarily, but to get out of the frigid cold, to get out of that situation, to get out of that, that environment where they had zero recourse or ability to survive. And they weren't funded by government. They just did it out of the goodness of their hearts, just because of their compassion, just because they saw humanity and acted on it. That's what that organization did with some of their staff, who ended up having asylum seekers in their own homes because there was no support for them anywhere else. And they didn't see and couldn't see how they could just be displaced, further be displaced, by the way, because these asylum seekers were displaced from their original country of origin, fled to the United States for safety, and then were forced again to flee again. So they were people who were fleeing over and over and over again, who were displaced over and over and over again. And this group has a very special place in my heart because I saw how beautiful they are, in their compassion, in their kindness, in their humanity, in the treatment of a fellow human being in distress. Mr. Chair, at the time, during this period, my office spoke with Greg Jansen, the Emerson Reef in Manitoba, and he tells us that crossings are no longer just on weeknights. As things escalated, it started to occur on a nightly basis. And temporary shelters for individuals was also becoming a problem. And as we now know, it's been an ongoing problem. It does bring to mind, Mr. Chair, the folks in Emerson, which is just a little town of about 600 people. And he noted that they've had about 300 people at that time cross into the town since February the 3rd. And the CBSA Center was full, and the local Salvation Army was also full. And he was concerned that if these trends continue or increase, they would need to set up something like a tent city of something to house people. And as the people continue to get desperate, and as the crossings continue, asylum seekers and NGOs on the ground were doing the best that they can. I know some NGOs, by the way, without government funding, opened their doors and shelters to house some of these asylum seekers. I know that even after the government has said that they would retroactively fund these organizations in Manitoba, I don't believe they actually even got the money, by the way, even though the government said that they would reimburse them for the services that they had provided to their asylum seekers. I don't believe that actually had happened, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the reality of this situation may well repeat itself in this second Trump administration. And the question then is, what have we learned from the first round? And what did the government do in preparing itself in this situation? But instead of taking a humanitarian approach, what I saw, of course, is that the government secretly negotiated an agreement on the Safe Third Country Agreement with the Biden administration. You know, there were many occasions when questions were asked at this committee when the minister showed up, and committee members asked the minister, the then minister, what was happening and what plans did they have in place. They kept saying that there was nothing happening, there was no negotiations, and so on and so forth. All behind the scenes, of course, they were doing intense negotiations, and we saw that when when Biden came to Canada, and then on that day, out of the blue, the government announced what they had secretly negotiated. And Canadians were kept in the dark the entire time. Members of Parliament were kept in the dark the entire time. And there was zero inkling as to what the government was planning on doing. And what we now know, of course, is that the government, in many ways, I would say, built an invisible wall, not the wall that Trump talked about in terms of bricks and mortar, but rather an invisible wall by extending the Safe Third Country Agreement to the entire border and then some. That's what we ended up seeing, Mr. Chair, and they put in provisions that made it even more harder for people to get to safety and push, I think, people further underground with respect to that. Mr. Chair, I say all of this, and I know that committee members are saying, you know, why is she going on about this? And, you know, and I'm going on about this because I have to remind committee members that these are real people and real lives. We all have hopes and dreams when we come to Canada. I'm an immigrant. My parents had hopes and dreams for me and my siblings, for sure. And we're all human beings. You know, I learned this from the Indigenous elders who's taught me, and I'm so grateful for their teachings, who taught me that we are all connected as one. They have a phrase for it in their Indigenous language, depending on which language they speak. Muksamak is what they told me, that we're all united as one. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but to my best ability. But that is the essence of it. That's why I am going on about it, because it isn't just out of sight, out of mind as well, but it's also not just to say we should look inwardly just for ourselves. You know, we have to look outwardly too, and to know that we're all part of the human race. Just, you know, I often try to understand the situation, and in that process, what do? I try to put myself in their situation, to see and try to imagine what it would be like and what you would hope for. So as a means to better understand this and to motivate myself to do, hopefully, the right thing. As a policymaker, as somebody who is a legislator, who's a parliamentarian, I've had the privilege of doing this for over 30 years now in different capacity at different levels of government. And part of that process is to really try to picture myself in someone else's shoes. Not that I could ever fully understand it, because I'm not there to fully experience it, but I do my best to try and understand it, and I talk with them so that I can hear their story, so that they can share in their own words their experiences, their thoughts with me, so that I can better articulate that, and also use this platform to elevate, to emphasize, to elevate their voice is really what I think, in many instances, what my job is to elevate their voice, to use this platform to give voice to them so that they could be heard, in the hopes that they could be heard, in the hopes that we can work across party collaboratively to find a path forward in the interest of humanity. I guess it's a thing that I keep coming back to, because there really isn't much about life in general, really, with the exception of our own humanity and how we receive it and how we respect it, and then how we honor it. I use that as a guide for me to do my work, especially in this portfolio, because that's what we're talking about. People who don't enjoy the freedoms that I enjoy, who don't enjoy the privileges that I enjoy, who don't enjoy the safety, the very basic thing for us to feel secure and whole and to have that safety, that protection in place. And so that's what I try to do. And that's what I hope that we could do. I keep hoping that, although there are many signs that shows me otherwise. And maybe some people don't care anymore. And maybe that's why people say, well, why is she going on about this? Because I actually do think at this juncture we need to be reminded of it. I need to be reminded of it. I try to remind myself every day of it. And then I think that we need to collectively remind each other of it. I don't think, I hope, and I don't think that people want to do this with ill intent. I hope that is not the case. But sometimes I feel sad about approaches that we take because I think that we've lost sight of why we're here and the purpose of it. And I think we've lost sight of humanity, Mr. Chair. And it makes me sad when I think about that a lot, actually. So on that note, Mr. Chair, I'm going to cede the floor. I have much more to say. I'm interested in voting on this sub-amendment and see where we go with this. And then I know that there are other speakers who wish to speak. And then, of course, after that, I would like to get back on the speakers list after the sub-amendment vote, Mr. Chair.
We are working on the amendment brought forward by Mr. Chang. So MP Kwan has finished. Now we will go to MP Kaibaga and then Mr. Comich. MP Kaibaga, floor is. No, you can't do that. So we will go to Mr. Comich. Mr. Comich.
So, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, before I go to you, MP Kaibaga, if you want to speak, you are welcome to, but you cannot give the floor to Mr. Chang himself, can put himself on the list.
I was not here, Chair, to
Thank you.
continue the conversation.
Okay, Mr. Comich, please go ahead.
So, Chair, I think we're on our third meeting now. I just very briefly, I just want to make sure I put this on the record that at the next time that we have either Minister Miller or Minister LeBlanc before the committee or someone from the RCMP or from Public Safety Canada or the immigration officials, I will be raising the question of the matter of, because it's relevant to this specifically, because it's been in the news, the way Ms. Kwan has talked about it, but the Globe and Mail reported last week that a Jordanian national who illegally crossed into Canada in 2017, stayed here, applied for refugee status, and was rejected by the Immigration Refugee Board and overstayed for several years. Then crossed illegally into the United States, was apprehended by Border Patrol, and then was deported back to Jordan, had turned out to be a known terrorist, and was on a terror watch list. So this was reported last week. And I just want to make sure that all the agencies know, because I know they'll be paying attention, that I will be asking questions about it when they appear before the committee on this motion or any other motion. And I will ask them, how can it be that someone who's on a terror watch list in the United States, and presumably on our watch lists, because this is a security issue, it's about our immigration system, it's about the security of our system, how can it be that someone who is also rejected by the Refugee Board would then be allowed to stay for so many years and only be apprehended in the United States to then be deported to their country of origin? To me, that's a big failure of our security system. It adds to the concerns that American officials will have, that we don't seem to be able to control our border. And furthermore, that this person had crossed illegally into Canada in 2017 and then crossed the entire country, presumably because from what I've been told, they crossed illegally into Canada across one of the states into Quebec, the province of Quebec, then found themselves all the way in British Columbia to then cross back. So I want to make sure the officials know that I will be raising the matter because I think it's of national interest and it is in the public interest. The Minister of Immigration, when he made comments on it publicly, said that there were privacy reasons for not releasing information related to the case. This person is a foreign national. He has no privacy rights. In fact, he was rejected by the IRB. He was more so deported by the Americans to their country of origin. It's in the public interest to disclose the particulars of that case so the public is assured that all the agencies did whatever they could to stop this individual, to try to catch this individual, that he was known. At least I would like to know if he was known to our agencies and that he was known to the Public Safety Minister and the Immigration Minister. With that being said, Chair, I move to adjourn the debate.
Okay. There's a motion on the floor to adjourn the debate. All in favor of adjourning the debate? No? Okay, so I don't see the vote there unless, Mr. Kmit, you want the recorded vote, or are you okay? Okay, thank you. So you still, so you're done with this, and now any other speakers before we take the vote on the amendment brought forward by Mr. Chang? I don't see any. All in favor of the amendment brought forward by Mr. Chang to Mr. Bruno's.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can you repeat the amendment?
Sure. I will ask Mr. Clerk to repeat the amendment.
Point out, Mr. President.
Point of order.
Point of order, Chair. Maybe I misunderstood, but Tom asked that we vote on adjourning the debate. So we have to vote immediately, right? There should be no debate after that request.
Already gone. So there was, I asked, because I thought that
Okay, yeah.
Mr.
J'ai pas vu le vote, c'est pour ça.
I did not see the vote, that's why.
Mr. Bruno Giuseppe, I personally saw that there were not a majority membership, and I asked Mr. Kmit if he wants the recorded vote. He said no, he's fine with that. So I had to take his word because he's the one who brought it forward. So with that point of order dealt with, now Mr. Clerk, on the request of MP Kwan, could you please state the amendment so before voting? Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Kwan, I know it has been a while since we did that, but it was distributed. But just for your information, the amendment was that the motion be amended by adding after the words statutes and policies the following: that the study consists of no less than 4 meetings. Then by adding after the words prioritize this study the following: alongside the study of the recent reforms to international student program and the study of the issuance of passport to a human smuggler, that the committee, and by adding after the words to the House the following, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response to the report.
Thank you very much. MP Kwan, you have any questions?
No.
Thank you. So all in favor of the amendment brought forward by MP Chang, all against? It is carried on division. And now we are back to the motion as amended. Okay, I have two speakers, Paul and MP Kwan. So, sure, go ahead, MP Kwan.
Mr. Chan, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, at this juncture, then I'd like to move an amendment to the motion. This was shared previously, and so I'm going to move this amendment now. And it would read as follows, and I'll highlight the parts to which the changes are taking place, Mr. Chair. So the motion reads that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on the implications for Canada, adding in these new words, and for undocumented people and people with temporary status in the United States. Then going back to the original language of the measures announced by Donald Trump during the U.S. presidential campaign regarding the deportation of, adding a new word, undocumented, and then back to original language, persons, then adding new language, and their family members, including children who are U.S. citizens, back to the original language, who are in the United States, and then striking out the word illegally, adding in new language, examine the proposal by U.S. President-elect Donald Trump to carry out the, quote, largest deportation program in American history, end quote, of millions of undocumented residents of the U.S., including his stated intentions to declare a national emergency and deploy the U.S. military to carry out mass deportations to determine if the U.S. still qualifies as a safe third country for refugees. Request, and then back to the original language, the Canadian federal government, and the new language, to table there, back to the original language, plan to ensure border security and compliance with federal immigration statutes and policies, and then new language, and to examine that it's in compliance with Canada's obligations under the Charter and international law, including the 1951 Refugees Convention, to which Canada is a signatory of for 55 years, and that the study takes into account this committee's report on asylum seekers at Canada's border that recommended safe third country exemptions for gender-based claims and claims from moratorium countries in recognition of the risk of harm these claimants face in the U.S. prior to the current deportation issues. Mr. Chair,
So, Chair, this substantive amendment has the same problem as the sub-amendment that was attempted before that you ruled out of order. So, Chapter 12, the process of debate on page 541, it says distinctly, an amendment should be so framed that if agreed to, it will leave the main motion intelligible and internally consistent. And it says what's out of order. So, I would say that this amendment makes this motion we've been debating not consistent anymore. It introduces a whole bunch of new ideas and entirely new subject matters for consideration, some of which I would submit to you, Chair, is out of order because it's out of scope of the committee's work. I also draw your attention to the following three bullets here on the page 541. That the sum of the substance of this is irrelevant to the main motion. It deals with matters foreign to the main motion, exceeds its scope, introduces a new proposition, which should properly be the subject of a separate substantive motion with notice. I submit to you, Chair, that that is the case in this motion. I'd also raise just questions substantially the same one, which we have dealt with as sub-amendment that you ruled out of order as well. And I think it's contrary in some parts to the main motion, which was to invite 2 ministers to talk about the Canadian experience. I'd also submit to you that it also violates Chapter 20 under the committee's work sections on what is an allowable amendment that can be submitted through the process. This is an entirely new motion. It can't be ruled in order, Chair. So I'd like a ruling from you.
Thank you. I'll give the ruling as soon as MP Kwan finish her motion on this one. MP Kwan, you finished the wording of the motion?
I have
No
finished.
debate, but you have all my question to you is, have you finished the motion?
I have finished the wording of the motion,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, and in the ruling that you're about to make on whether or not this is in order, I would argue that this is exactly the nature of the issue that we're dealing with. As you can see by the original motion, it actually talks about the committee undertake a study on the implications for Canada of the measures announced by Donald Trump during the U.S. presidential campaign regarding the deportation of persons who are in the United States, and for the Canadian federal government to Canadian federal government's plan to ensure border security and compliance with immigration statutes and policies. And so my motion and my amendments to this is dealing with the United States and their immigration policy, and it expands on it by adding some additional components to it, but it is consistent with the thrust of this motion, which centrally is about the U.S. presidential campaign plan to massively deport people in the United States and the Canadian government's plan on how they're going to deal with it.
Okay, I'm going to suspend for a few minutes, and I'm going to come up with the ruling momentarily. I heard the arguments both from Mr. Kmitch and MP Kwan, and my ruling goes along with the Mr. Kmitch that this goes beyond the scope of the original motion. So we are back to the motion as amended. You can challenge the chair, MP
Yes.
Kwan, but that's what.
I'm challenging the chair.
Okay, the chair is challenged, and no debate. I'll take a vote on this one, and all in favor. Okay, Mr. Clerk.
Are we voting that
The chair is challenged now.
No,
The
but-
decision.
Because you're going to say yes, vote yes or no.
Point out, point out, point out, point out, point out. On attend.
Point of order. We have interpreters, health and safety, please. So, please let us be more patient and take turns and be mindful of our interpreters who are doing a great job and they're the best in the world.
Okay, thank you, MP Kaibaga.
Thank you, Chair.
Because the chair.
Yeah, my apologies to my colleague. I thought this was going to be a really quick thing, but you're about to call a vote, and we're going to have to say yes or no. I'm just trying to figure out, are we voting yes or no to sustain the ruling of the chair
that's
or for her challenge? Like, what
No,
exactly?
okay.
Can you
So-
just make the language plain and understandable?
So it is to sustain the ruling of the chair.
Awesome.
That's correct.
That was very
So,
small and
but I would ask Mr. Clerk to say one more time what we are voting on.
Yes, so the question that the chair is asking the committee is, shall the ruling of the chair be sustained?
Thank you. Now, all in favor? Against? Recorded vote. Please go ahead, MP, Mr. Clerk.
So I will just repeat again the question, so that shall the chair, wait, the ruling of the chair be sustained? Mr. Ali,
Yes.
Mr. Chang,
Yes.
Monsieur El Khoury, Madame Kayabaga,
Pour?
Ms. Zaid,
Yes.
Mr. Kimmich,
Yes.
Mr. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. McLean,
Oui.
Mr. Ridicop,
Yes.
Monsieur Bounel-Duceppe,
Oui.
Ms. Kwan.
No.
So nays 1, yeas 11.
Carried. So we are back to the motion as amended. So I have Mr. Reddycop and then MP Kwan and Mr. Chang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so we're back to the motion as amended. There's one part of this that I would like to propose an amendment for, and that is when it comes to the section that says, as well as any other witnesses the committee considers necessary. I'd like to specify a little more clearly that I think we should be hearing from some witnesses, because a lot of this is about people traveling across the border illegally, and we all know, we've heard lots of testimony that.
There is a point of order, Mr. Reddycop. I will go to MP Chang on point of order.
Mr. Chair, I was on speaking order after Ms. Kwan.
It's true. Before we went, because we are on the motion as amended, so it's not Mr. Chang that brought the movement forward. So I'm sorry. So my apologies. I will come back
But
to you.
you gave me the floor, though.
I will come to you, and I hope you will agree that I, as a chair, sometimes can overlook, and I'm always fair. So try to be fair. And Mr. Chang, floor is yours. So I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my committee member across the aisle there. Mr. Chair, I move to adjourn the meeting.
There is a motion on the floor to adjourn the meeting. It's a non-debatable motion. All in favor of adjourning the meeting, please say yes. All that are against?
Recorded
Vote. Okay, recorded vote. Okay, so Mr. Clerk, take the vote, please.
So the question is to adjourn the meeting, proposed by Mr. Chang. Mr. Ali,
In favor.
Mr. Chang,
In favor.
Monsieur El Khoury,
Pour.
Madame Kayabaga,
Pour?
Ms. Zaid,
Yes.
Mr. Kimmich. Yes. Mr. Maguire,
Yes.
Mr. McLean,
Pour.
Mr. Riddicup,
Yes.
Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe, Ms. Kwan,
No.
yeas 9, nays 2.
Meeting adjourned.